Gary, good morning, and
Good
thank
morning.
you so much for the chance to get together today.
Glad to be together.
We're here in the ACTEM office in Gorham. Your position now, what do you do?
I'm the acting executive director. I'm finishing up my 10th year in that position.
So ACTEM, and we will certainly be visiting ACTEM in this conversation in your role, ACTEM's role in the MLTI. But we've gotten, and I've asked to sit down for this conversation because as technology was beginning to be understood to be a significant and long-term player in Maine education, you've been involved from the beginning of those times.
Yes.
So before we even get to the MLTI, let's go back into the 90s. You were industrial arts in Cape Elizabeth?
Yes, I started as an industrial arts teacher in Cape. I taught for 15 years at the middle school and moved to the high school. When the department chair retired, and kind of expanded the department a little bit to bring in some computer things, desktop publishing.
How did you see those fit into industrial arts? What opened your eyes to the fact, and certainly today and in the industrial world, digital technology is everywhere, but what did you see in those times that it was time to make those expansions?
Well, the computers were the tools to do some of this new stuff. I mean, there was, in desktop publishing, there was the light table, and you were hand pasting letters and graphics together, and then the computer came along, and you could do that all on the screen. In architectural or mechanical drawing, you're drawing on paper and pencil, but you can do that on a computer, and it's just so much easier to edit and change than it is, a hand-drawn paper copy of something.
Yeah.
So it was just a new tool, and make it easier and make the changes easier.
Yeah, and then of course the question comes: so what do we do with it, with that newfound power and capability? So you and I were talking earlier, and I'm going to stay before 2002 and the implementation first of the exploration schools, and then in the fall of 2002 the rollout of the 7th grade for the MLTI. You were in that at the high school, beginning to experiment with technology. The district, you've told me, the Cape Elizabeth, where you were, became aware the technology was coming. The board asked for a plan, needed to know more than just, we'd like to have this technology. They were asking for a plan.
Correct. They were hesitant to spend money on technology until they knew where it was going.
Okay.
A vision and a plan. And the Cape School Board basically charged us. We put together a steering committee for the district and tried to put that plan together to see what it would look like and how we could phase in things over the future. And I worked on that committee. We hired an external consultant from the Maine Center for Educational Services in Auburn, and that consultant was Jay Travaro.
So he came in, helped put that, you worked on that document as well?
Correct. And we actually presented that to the school board. The school board actually accepted the plan, and we moved forward from there. And one of the first few things that they did was to hire a technology coordinator at the time.
Okay.
To kind of spearhead and lead that plan forward.
And who was hired?
And Jay Travaro was the
Okay.
one that was hired.
Who had worked at design. So he left the center, came over to Cape for a year. You told me he stayed for 1 year and then went on to another project.
Yeah, he basically stayed for 1 year. Gave us notice in August of just before the school year, and the school district was kind of in a spot, and approached me to to kind of come into that position. I was a teacher at the high school at the time.
Sure.
And what they did is they said that I could try this position out. They could try me out in the position, and we could decide in the future, if I wanted to continue or if they wanted me to continue. One of the nice things was that I could go back to the classroom if I needed to.
No harm, no foul. If it
Correct.
didn't work, if it wasn't the right fit for you, you could go back to the classroom.
Correct.
So you go into that position. Now we move forward. So this would have been the fall of '98.
Correct.
Technology's use continues to grow. The community of learners had pretty much run its course in Brunswick and MS 8075 in Bath, where I had worked as a staff developer. SEED was fairly recently funded, was in or just beginning actually with the large funding
Right.
opportunity that they had. And the MLTI is not really a glimmer yet.
Not yet. Not in the 90s.
When as you became the technology director, was ACTEM a going concern?
I mean, I was not that familiar with Actim as a classroom teacher, but learned as I moved into the coordinator type role, and it was a great benefit to me. And Actim did play a role in the early stages, just prior to the MLTI. But I think there were a lot of committees, advisement committees, and things like that Actim established back then that helped lay some of the groundwork.
Yeah.
For what's now Milty.
Yeah, people concerns and bringing in the people who are working directly in the field. As the MLTI begins to come together, so now we move forward into 2001, the idea. So things start to bubble up.
Right.
The MLTI, which at the time was not initially put forward as the MLTI, it was put forward as the MLTE, the Main Learning Technology Endowment.
Correct.
The idea being that it would be funded in perpetuity and grow a year by year.
Right.
Continue to fund replacements, etc.
But the endowment part didn't quite pass.
Right. That was a little new and was too much change. It was
Right.
a fundamental policy change that the legislature ultimately was not comfortable with. The main people
Weren't
weren't ready
with.
for.
Right.
So you became president of Actim in 2002.
Correct.
But before that, as the MLTI is beginning to come forward, you were asked to do some review. You've shared with me a document. This is September 14th, 2001. This is the RFP, the request for proposals for the
Original.
This is the original,
Right.
which was Main Learning Technology Wireless Classroom Solution. You were asked to review those as a tech coordinator.
Correct. Betty Manchester contacted me at the time, and they sent down that particular packet.
Yep.
And I went through it, reviewed it, and actually went to Augusta for a meeting where we discussed I think there were 3 final options in there.
If we go back, there were not, every district didn't have a technology coordinator at that point, did they?
That's true. No, they didn't. I mean, many districts had, they might be a teacher or somebody on staff doing it part-time.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a person in charge
Yeah.
in every district.
So your role, you get to do that review. The MLTI comes into being. The Apple solution is selected.
Correct.
The MLTI comes into being. The idea that I think of as really coming to be out of Cape Elizabeth was the idea of student involvement in support of the use of technology for teaching and learning in the classroom and across the school. And you called it the I-Team.
We did, and we connected with a bunch of students that were very interested in technology and had some time on their hands that they could assist, and they did all kinds of things for us. Like one of the things that we did in Cape Elizabeth, because every district is a little different, we had to build a kind of an image. This is the Cape Elizabeth version of the Milty laptop that goes on every single laptop in our district. And I did things like the kids would help me maybe look at some of the software, select the software, test the software. We'd build the image. They'd try to break the image and see if things were all right. Did we forget something? They were great at that kind of stuff. And ultimately, we'd end up with a final image, and we'd clone it to all of the laptops that we had going out to the 7th and 8th grade students.
So that image, I mean, the thing that's so important to see, that's the real deal. This is not if it's good enough, just get the work done and pass it in, which there are too many times in a classroom. We've all known students who, as long as the teacher accepts the work, I'm done with it. Mm-hmm. So the investment, did kids care about the work they were doing?
They did. And they would, they were very good at testing things, telling us when things weren't quite right. They actually came in and we did some of the imaging. I can remember working weekends to try to get all of these. Well, and for Cape, we probably had 300 plus laptops. And that was one of the other impetus for the I-Team. I had myself and maybe a couple of other staff at the time, and just sheer numbers. We just didn't have enough people to help with things. And what's really good about the I-Team kids is you had some maybe in every class, and if some teacher couldn't connect to the projector, some teacher couldn't print, there were kids in the room.
The problems that happen.
The things that happen. There were kids in the room that said, "Oh, I can help you with that."
Yep.
And we didn't have to be in every single classroom.
Right. So it didn't, because we all know that break, that stop, if the technology doesn't work, then I set it aside. And especially if we go back to 2002, when this is for 7th grade brand new, then the next year it's 7th and 8th grade. Right. And again, in all candor, there were many educators for whom, if it doesn't work, I'm more comfortable going back to the way I've always done it.
Correct.
So having that intervention, that support available at the time of need was critically important.
Yeah, invaluable. And we, there's no way we could have hired more staff to do that, too.
To be waiting in the hallway.
To be waiting in the hall or to be in everybody's classroom. It wasn't financially feasible.
Right. And yet, functionally of great value.
Right.
Did you receive support? What was the sense of building principals for the work you were doing? Were they supportive? Did they see the value of what you were doing specifically with the kids?
Well, we had both sides of that.
Yeah?
In Cape Elizabeth, there was one administrator that was super supportive of everything we were doing, and then one was not so super supportive. And you could actually see it in the difference in the building. Sure. And this was later down the road when we expanded, beyond 7th and 8th grade, and went, we had a middle school and a high school in Cape. And you could see the difference between the two buildings. When you have a supportive administrator that, if I go up to that person and say, we're having a little issue with this, I'd like to do a little training. Can I come into your, faculty meeting for 10 minutes or so and go over some? And they said yes. That's the kind of support you need. And I understand that administrators, their first job is to support their staff and their teachers. Some teachers didn't want to go along with this technology, or didn't particularly like the kind of technology that we had. They were used to a different technology. So you're fighting all of these battles and trying to, it's a lot easier if it's coming from more than just the technology coordinator, technology director.
Well, isn't that one of the discoveries, and not only in CAPE, but in the MLTI work across the state of Maine, the building principle truly
Was key.
Was key.
Yeah.
And the building principle acting in concert with the technology coordinator, with the librarian, with the teacher leaders, with the community.
That was the powerful connection. So
Was
if you could get all of those things working together, that was powerful.
The Apple solution was selected, so done. That was, there was a single vendor, and we go back to Angus's famous one throat to choke.
Right.
He wanted, there were no avenues for excuses for the computer vendor to say, well, our computers are fine, it's your wireless that's the problem.
Right.
Our software, talk to the software vendor, it's not our fault.
As a tech coordinator director, you got into these finger pointing issues with many other different vendors.
But I want to go back to '98 when you were hired to be the technology coordinator. So when you came and became the administrator in charge of the district's use of technology, there were some students who were already engaged. And in our conversation, they were engaged with the technology, but you felt some of the supervision or the purposefulness of their engagement hadn't been effectively addressed, you felt.
Yes, when I started, and Jay had these several, I don't know, 3 or 4 students, they were very good with technology, and I think he gave them some pretty good leeways with the network and things that could happen. And when I came in, I was a little concerned. Well, I was, as a classroom teacher, some of these students, I can remember being in class one time and where they had taken control of my computer with Apple Remote Desktop, and I just didn't think that should probably happen. I think there needed to be a little bit more supervision, so I kind of pulled back on some of those, and I kind of used that lesson when I started the I-team too, that we wanted to give students some control, some administrative rights, but there needed to be some supervision. You can't just give them free reins and everything. And I think that works best. And the teachers felt confident about that as well as the students.
Well, and ultimately, the buck stops here.
Correct.
The ultimate responsibility is with the technology coordinator. And that role, the marrying, and again, how deeply or purposefully you thought about this, my memory of the I-team that you developed was in direct, how does what the I-team does, not only to yourself, but to turn to a student who's involved and say, how does what you are doing help CAPE make more effective use of the technology we have?
Right. And that was our goal, to provide our technical assistance for my tech team, but really it was more about providing the help for the students and teachers in the classrooms out there in the school each day.
You mentioned the student tech team, the I-team, being in support of that teacher who lost connection to a printer or to a projector or something. But did the I-team also support their peers? If a student got stuck on something, could there be support for them as well?
Most definitely. And they probably informally did that all the time with their students. So, because there's a wide range of skills in the students with the use of technology, just like there is with the staff.
Yeah.
And they need just as much support.
Well,
as the
and
teachers.
once a student helps another student, poof, you're a professional developer too, because you now know something.
You can help the next person.
You can help the next person. The I-team grew, and it was probably 2003. I should be clear on this date, but having watched what was going on, that responsibility and the impact of the I team. Can you think of a specific teacher or an event where a teacher, you've mentioned, it could be a printer, it could be something. Did it make a difference?
I had some of the kids, for the imaging process.
Yeah.
They would come in on weekends, and some of these kids on the I team would also go out with us because we presented at conferences. And I think that's what started this student tech team process growing around the States and some of the other. I mean, I'm not sure we were the first, but we were one of the early stages.
Maine was early.
Right.
Yeah.
So that happened, and I think I can't think of a specific incident with a student or a teacher because I'm old and my memory's not as good.
It's okay.
But I think providing a computer up front that's been tested and know that you can print on our networks, you can connect to our networks, you can get to the internet, the email works, the software that I'm supposed to have is on there, and when I open it up, it's going to work. Giving you a device that you can feel fairly confident with will hopefully encourage you to use it more, and that's what we tried to do for both
turnkey.
Right, for both students and staff.
The genesis of the MLTI student conference really came from the I team as well, because the first of those, which we held over in Gorham.
In Gorham, yes.
But it really came because there were, across the state, kids becoming involved in the use of technology. I remember one of the sessions I did in that first student conference was how to write technical documentation, because kids were doing things like that.
Right.
Specificity, clarity of language, et cetera, et cetera. And the student conference, we have behind us here a picture which it grew into, because I think maybe 200 people came to Gorham High School maybe in all. I can't remember
Probably.
exactly.
All right.
But it grew up.
And the current version of that is happening this week, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was told by a DOE person that there were over 6,000 people registered virtually and over 50 schools represented.
Wow.
At this year's version of the Milty Conference.
Well, in part driven by COVID.
Right.
Going to the virtual, and also just following the trends. It's become the new normal, that virtual connection.
True. Right.
But imagine to go from 200 on up. Actum support for the MLTI, and not a glad-handed everything. There are times you can be a critical friend. You were president from 2002?
2002 to 2006.
You now have been executive director, as you said, 10 years?
Yes, since 2012. And then prior to that, I was conference chair. So the conferences from 2006 to 2012, I was spearheading.
Yep.
And then from then on, I'm kind of on the other end of the things. With
Yeah.
Actum, I support the exhibitors and logistics and other kinds of things for the conference.
Yeah.
But I'm still involved today.
If we look backwards, the arrival of one-to-one computing in Maine, at the scale it arrived, there were a few places that it was going on in small scale, individual schools, etc. Australia, New Hampshire,
Crystal Priest,
SAD
4.
starting up beginning in SAD 4. But it literally rocked the education world. And beyond that, it showed what could be done with large-scale one-to-one individual access to the devices. When you look ahead, how can Maine take advantage, learn from what happened as the MLTI came into being, to look forward? What lessons should be carried forward to whatever comes next in technology?
Well, I think the current version of MLTI, when MLTI started, there was some, like, I forget what they were called, teacher leaders or something like that, that came out of the classroom
Yep.
and helped with professional development around the state. I think it faded off a little bit in mid-years, but now they're back to that again with teacher leaders. And I think that the professional development, ongoing support is key. That needs to continue and for things to be effective in the future. And I think there's an increased emphasis in that. The new Milty is a little more customizable. It's not just one device anymore. There's an options available depending on your district, which has its pluses and minuses. But it's meeting the needs of the districts right now, and I think that's what's good. So it's a little more flexible. The PD is still there, and there's still a good core group at the DOE that's kind of leading this.
Indirect support. How important is it to keep growing the awareness of the technology, the opportunities and challenges, but the opportunities for, as we talked about, building principals, superintendents, not only the tech coordinators,
Right.
but those folks. How important?
It's extremely key. I mean, we talked about, having administrative support in a building from a principal, assistant principal, curriculum person is really key. And Actum tries to support those things. Our fall conference is mostly teacher focused, although there's a smorgasbord of offerings there. The spring leadership one is geared more towards the technical people and the leaders, and more vendor driven. But we're finally back in person in September, in May this year, and people are really appreciating getting back together. I look forward to this fall and hopefully seeing people together
Come
again
together.
in person.
Yeah.
The unofficial PD that happens from meeting this guy in the hallway that that has a similar position, that has a similar problem that you may be having in your district, or is looking at this new SIS or this new piece of software. I mean, getting feedback from people in the state is super critical, and that's one of the things that we try to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for everything you've done. You certainly, as I came into the technology world and made use and began to share ideas, certainly the ideas that I took, the idea of the I-team, which you're right, there were other people talking about it, but nobody in a situation which had the scale and the density that was here in Maine. But it's certainly an idea, not just an idea, but a quality of the thoughtfulness of why.
Right.
There's a what to do, yeah, do this. There's a how to do it this way. But that the enduring question is the why, and I've always appreciated your insistence on having the why we are doing something.
And a key person that I want to mention who was involved with that in Cape was Beverly Bisbee. She was a teacher, and she was kind of the co-person that helped with the I-team in the middle school. So she was a classroom teacher. She had a direct connection to the students, and I'm coming in as a tech director, and we working together really made things work well for that team.
A teacher conscience
Correct.
to make sure that first things first.
Right.
Well, Gary, thank you again.
Thank you.
For the
All
chance
right.
to meet. It's been wonderful. Good luck, and I'll look forward to the fall. You've reminded me I need to put together my
Proposal.
My session proposal, because I'm not going to miss that one.
Good.
All right.
All right.
Thanks again, Gary.
Okay, you're welcome.